so much, Shivraj. Hello and welcome all to the Rainbow Literature Festival 2020. I want to thank all of you who are watching this today from different parts of the world and different time zones, and especially our fabulous panelists who have agreed to join us and share their ideas. I'm going to moderate this session on perspectives, and I feel particularly honored to do this because if there is one thing we are gradually losing out on, it is our ability to hold multiple perspectives. It is our ability to engage with them and work through them in different ways. I'm reminded of a phrase which the Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie once said, that the dangers of a single story is perhaps the most potent dangers of all. And with that, keeping that in mind, I would like to come to our fabulous panelists, and maybe we can start with Seema. And I would like to ask you, especially because you have worked with the Kamasutra, ancient erotica, the question that why do you think it is important for us to go back to the Kamasutra? Or to put it in other ways, what perspectives can the Kamasutra bring to our understandings of sex, sexuality, desire, pleasure in the 21st century? Over to you, Seema.
Thank you, Rahul. Hi, everyone. Okay, so I generally get asked, Rahul, I like the way you asked the question, because generally people will say to me, so what is the relevance of the Kama Sutra in the 21st century? And I always think, nobody stopped having sex in all these 2000 years. So I don't know why people still ask that, because most people think it's a book about sex. Anyway, let's just get down to this, because we have very short time to talk about things. And I have a lot to say about the Kama Sutra. I'm glad that you asked, because I want to bust some of the myths around it. This is the text that for the very first time talked about equality for women. Yes, only equality in the bedroom, but you know what? Even in today's day, that is still not a reality for most people. This is the text that talked about the pleasure of women, not only talking about the pleasure, but talking about the fact that it is distinct from man's pleasure. To me, that was a really important point, because till then it had been held that a woman's pleasure is dependent on the pleasure of a man, that she doesn't have an independent source of pleasure. The Kama Sutra is the first text to say that not only does a woman have her own source of pleasure, but that it is completely independent of that of a man. And that itself was a very brave statement to make, because you can imagine standing up to thousands of years of belief and holding that particular flag up. That's what actually made this text so controversial, not the fact that it was written on sex, or it's a treatise on sexuality, because there are thousands of those. This is the first text to talk about how any kind of aggression or violence in sex was completely not to be permitted. This constantly taught it. And it talks about consent for women in a way that it had never talked about before, and so on. This idea of pleasure, to go back to it, most people think that this is a text written for women to understand how to pleasure a man. That is absolutely incorrect. Back in 300 and something AD, when the Kama Sutra was written, women were not taught how to read or write. So these texts were written to teach men how to bring a woman to pleasure. And it stated that a woman's pleasure was paramount, that if the woman was completely pleasured, if she was okay, the universe would be okay. I mean, it was that important. It was that big a deal. And personally, I believe that the erotic literatures of India were probably written by a woman, because I don't think that any man would have given this much eminence or this much importance to the way that a woman thinks and what is important for her. It was important also to remember that the text that distinguishes between sex and pleasure. We have come to believe over time that it's just this one thing. This is the one perspective. Sex, this is pleasure, this is everything. It busts all those myths, and it's amazing. I mean, Freud tells us that the only kind of real orgasm for a woman is a penetrative one. Everything else, the word that Freud used was that everything else is juvenile. This is the text that says that that's the least pleasurable thing for a woman, that there are so many other things that come into it. But okay, what is very exciting is that it also tells us that the most desirable man is the one who has got a diverse personality, somebody who can do multiple conversations. And I think that's fabulous, because the patron deity of the Kama Sutra is not Kamdev, it's Saraswati, because the man who was most culturally well-versed was the most desirable man of all. So the 64 skills that most people think are to do with sex, they're not. It's about learning foreign languages. It's about doing word riddles. It's about getting to be a diverse person, somebody that everybody can come and talk to, somebody who can keep you entertained for many, many years to come. Exercise is a great thing. It tells you that exercise is the sexiest thing of all. It's what makes you really sexy. And this back all the way to 300 and something, 2,000 years ago. But I think when we talk about its importance in today's perspective, this is the text that's inspired 2,000 years of our literature. Most people are not aware of this, but 2,000 years, all the way till the end of the 1800s, most of the literature, the Prakrit literature, the classical Sanskrit literature of India, are epic romances, they're prabandhams. And they're based on the erotics that are offered up by the Kama Sutra. But the Kama Sutra is written in metaphor. It's a treatise, like the Arth Shastra, like the Shilp Shastra. And so if you don't understand the metaphors, you don't understand what those texts are about. So take, for instance, Kumar Sambhavam by Kalidas. In that there's this beautiful scene where Parvati is dressed for her wedding. And right at the end of it, once she's all dressed up, the maids paint her feet with alta, with the red paste under her feet. And they say, now let's see how Shiva will take those feet to his Chandrama. And you're left thinking, what does that mean? Well, what it meant was that in those days, the most popular position was where the woman would be underneath and her ankles would be on shoulders. When you made love, that alta would rub off on the man's forehead. And if you saw a man walking around with a bit of bread over here, you knew that he had just made love. And so the idea of taking a woman's feet to your head was that you were lovers. And so, the whole thing is written in metaphor. If you read Kadambari, for instance, and you read about the prince walking through these, are we coming up to, we're going to stop over here. I'm just going to finish by saying that the idea here was that it was going to be the most fabulously civilized society, is what they believed in the ancient times, that if you created this idea in people's mind that sex and sexuality and lovemaking was elegant and beautiful and refined, with that would come a really civilized society. And I think that's a perspective we need to take forward right now.
Thank you so much, Seema. That was fabulous. And I think you touched upon two very, very crucial points, which I think are really important to ponder upon. One is that this is a text which centers around the pleasure of women. And you're also speculating that most ancient erotic texts were written by women and for women. And I think that's I really find that very intriguing.
Not by women, but for men. You have to remember that it was the men that were taught how to read or write. So to make them understand how to behave.
Right. So with that, keeping in mind the authorship of women, I would actually like to go to Nandini, because Nandini is somebody who has worked on historical fiction, who has rewritten history as fiction from different perspectives. And what do you think? The question that I would like to pose to you actually is, why the turn to history? As in, why do you choose historical fiction as your genre? And second, writing as a woman. What do you think are the possibilities and challenges of engaging with history? And I think that can be a good take from where we left with Seema. So over to you, Nandini.
Thank you so much, Rahul. it's interesting what Seema is talking about here, because the period that she's talking about is a period that I researched extensively for my Gupta Empire trilogy. I find, in keeping with the topic of discussion today, history is very, very important because, as Horace said, nothing is beautiful from every point of view. And history is about POVs, right? The reason why POVs are so important in history is because it is skewed. And most history is written by men for men. The chroniclers are men. So that is the reason why the stories of women tend to get overshadowed, sometimes entirely overlooked. Right now, I am researching a medieval Indian queen, and her story has been very effectively forgotten, completely forgotten, because she happened to be in the shadow of a very powerful man. So the whole point of bringing multiple POVs into history is very important, because unless you look at the same story from different points of view, you're not going to get the real picture, are you? And that is something that I've had great fun doing, actually. And because I write historical fiction, it gives me a little bit more elbow room to play around with that theme a little bit more. In fact, my latest book, The Blue Horse and Other Amazing Animals from Indian History, actually takes it to its logical extreme. Because if we say history is about our story, her story, his story, it should also be their story. It should also be the story of animals, and if we say that historical perspectives skew the way we look at a particular event, a battle maybe, a coronation maybe, an assassination maybe, or just a very, very stable rule, whatever we are looking at in history, if that perspective is skewed in favor of the species that is sitting right on top of the food chain, which is the Homo sapien man, imagine how badly left out of the picture an animal would feel. So the whole point is that what I'm trying to say here is that effectively, if to me as a writer, history is about stories. And it's very interesting what Seema was talking about Kamasutra. Again, I would like to say just a couple of words, if I may, about the Kamasutra. While researching uh, 4th, 5th, and 6th century India, I read the Kamasutra. And the reason why, when I was asked, when The King Within first came out, and then later on The Poisoned Heart, I was asked, what are your sources? And I said, well, one of the books that I referred to was the Kama Sutra. And I was asked, oh, well, but that's about sex. Guess what? It's not just about sex. It's about a lot more than sex. It's about living. It's about food. It's about toiletry. It's about daily habits. And, if you look at such an important treatise as the Kama Sutra, as Seema was talking about, and reduce it only to one perspective, you're going to get a skewed view. You will not understand what that book was meant to do, or what that book did for the society that it was written for. And this is just one example. There are so many examples. I mean, if I take a random example from history, if I ask you, who were the great names, the greats in our history, for instance, 9 out of 10 times, a person will say, oh, well, there is Alexander the Great, there is Ashoka the Great, there is Akbar the Great. Guess what? These are all men the great. How come we don't have any women the greats? How come we don't have a Prabhavati Gupta the Great? How come we don't have a Didda the Great? How come we don't have an Abakka Chauta the Great? How come we don't have a Virangana Durgavati the Great? We don't, because the stories are written by men. You see, the skews are there because the way history is chronicled comes with an inherent skew. And that's why I find it's very, very interesting to look at POVs in history and to look at multiple POVs, because the more the POVs, the more multi-layered and nuanced the story is going to be.
Fantastic. I mean, firstly, thank you very much for being so precise. And I think one of the points that you raised, and I'm really struck by that, is where is the place of animals within storytelling? And if it is written by men, are animals even below the human strata, as in even comes after women? And I would actually like to come back to the point and ask something about the animal in relation to the Kama Sutra to Seema. But before that, I want to ask Pradipta, uh, you know, you have been a filmmaker, you have been an actor, you have been a designer, a teacher. I mean, you have worn many hats. I want to ask you that moving from an ancient text to fiction to filmmaking and acting, which also bear strong relationships to fiction, how important do you think is the role that gender plays? And we have been talking about women. I want to move to issues of queerness and transness. And I want to ask you that how important do you feel uh, your gender identity has been in navigating these multiple spaces as a teacher, as a filmmaker, as an actor? And what perspective has it brought or has it not brought? So if you can just shed some light on it. Over to you, Pradipta.
Sure. Thanks, Rahul, and good evening, everyone. Um, First of all, I'm like really surprised to be a part of a panel where it seems I mean most of us are sort of I mean have a I mean fair enough understanding of Kama Sutra. I mean that's how we all are related. I mean even we had to read only a section of Kama Sutra because the theories of Indian painting they are also they also come from Kama Sutra. So in my during my fine art days, we had to go through those chapters in Kama Sutra. So it's fabulous to know that there are people who are still understanding and talking about Kama Sutra, not just as a book which used to be a gift item for weddings, at least in Calcutta they used to be. So it'll be a naughty book to give to people who are getting married, for the couples to actually to understand and practice those so-called, or as it was perceived by people, those positions and postures without even realizing it's actually not, the book is actually not only about those postures. And there are nothing called so many postures in the book. And coming back to your question, I think some 2 3 points I would say here, that my sexuality or identity, and I come from a generation where, at least in India, we are the, I call ourselves the transition generation. Like we were born as, I mean, I was born as a very effeminate boy, a boy who was always looked at and laughed at all the time. Even now, when I'm going to a shopping mall, in my men's clothing, people giggle. I mean, now one has sort of gotten used to ignoring whatever is happening. So I think the sexuality, one of the most important aspects is that it has made me become more sensitive, and which is needed. One of the very basic ingredients of say, be it a storyteller or a designer or a creative individual, right? So one has to keep observing people and things that are taking place around us. So I think that's one thing, one of the most important things is making me sensitive towards everything. And I suppose I can elaborate on this, that being a heteronormative or a heterosexual man would often make us take things for granted, because everything is sort of presented to the heterosexual man on the platter. So often they would just take things for granted, but for me at least, it was the other way around. So I think it just made me more sensitive towards everything, all the sexes, everything what is happening around me. That is one thing. And I think it teaches empathy, because again, when I say, oh, I feel so bad for someone else, for me it means nothing. Probably again there, I mean, uh, without even realizing, probably I'm actually thinking in my head that the other person is, when I feel sorry for someone else, maybe there would be some degrees, percentage of thinking that the person is little lesser than me. So I think empathy is more important, where one needs to understand where the other person is coming from. So that is equally important. And in terms of perspectives, I think being sensitive and understanding the things which are going around us, the politics that is going around us, I thought maybe one needs to sort of document. You know, that's my way of contributing to. I wouldn't really say contributing, because that'll again make me sort of sound that I'm trying to put myself at a higher pedestal. I would say that is my little bit towards humanity. I mean, this is our duties. I mean, why we were all born as human beings, so we have something to give back, right, to the planet. So I think instead of attacking, as uh, uh, Nandini also said, that it is about perspectives and coexistence, right? So I think with my little whatever ways, possible ways, I have been making short films as of now, hoping to be making feature films soon enough. So I'm just documenting queer lives, which means I don't make documentary films. I don't make documentaries. I make fictions, but based on real characters. Well, any writer always is getting inspired by real characters, and they weave a story around them and all. So I think it's my duty to sort of document the time that I was born and I was on this planet, and I am on this planet. So, and then politics obviously changes. History is rewritten again and again, depending upon who is ruling or governing a certain state. Have I taken too much time, Rahul?
You have one more minute, Pradipta, and then we can maybe come
Okay.
back to you.
Okay. So yeah. So my way of, if you want to call it activism or spreading awareness, is through everything that I do. I mean, through my films and documenting, when I'm teaching at least perspectives and trying to tell them that, one needs to be able to be a creative individual. They have to be aware of whatever is happening around them, be it human beings, nature, everything. I mean, you can't shut your eyes towards anything which is happening. I mean, that's what at least creative profession is all about.
Great, thank you very much. And I mean, the two things that I'm really intrigued by from whatever you said was the point about empathy and how your gender identity or identification has made you more empathetic. And I'm thinking also about what you spoke about documentation in terms of documenting queer lives and how empathy and documentation perhaps speak to one another. And with this, I want to actually go to Michiel, because Michiel has also documented uh, masculinity in India at various spaces, uh, like gyms, where men come together, and not just, I mean, it's a kind of a performance of masculinity, but also what does that say about class, middle class aspirations, and things aligned to all of those things. And I want to actually ask the question to Michiel, following from what Pradipta just said. Why did you choose, firstly, India as a space to study masculinity? And second, how do you think, or if you think or not, your identity has impacted your documentation of, quote, muscular lives in India? Has it enriched it? Has it kind of posed a difficulty for you? So if you can just shed some light on it. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Rahul, and thank you for this opportunity. I mean, I've so enjoyed these perspectives by Seema, Nandini, and Pradipta, and it's already given me food for thought as it goes actually with gender and with masculinity. And I must say that my point of entry really into questions of masculinity usually start with that we always think that we know who men are because they're so overexposed throughout literature, right? I mean, and I'm an anthropologist, and one of the big critiques within anthropology has often been that the focus is almost entirely on men, especially in classical anthropological texts. But one thing that emerged out of the discussions on masculinity is really that we don't really ask the question how men think of themselves as men in relation to other men. So that's a very important question to ask if we want to understand how society actually functions. So one thing we did, and we have an enormous depth of gratitude here to the feminist movement and scholarly movements related to gender in kind of highlighting women's voices. But I think partly what I'm trying to do in my own book, in Muscular India, is also specifically asking men to reflect on their own positionality in society. So I'm a little ahead of what you asked me to get into. So let's get the big sort of, address the elephant in the room. Why am I actually looking into a topic in India to begin with? I've been coming to India for the past 2 decades. I've lived in India, and this topic where I focus on fitness trainers and bodybuilders was something that really emerged over a very long period of scholarly engagement with India, partly fueled, I guess, by the very fact that I saw it emerge, its popularity. So as I described in my book, it was really pre-2008 that there wasn't much of a fitness industry in India. All of that changed really with Shah Rukh Khan's performance in Om Shanti Om, which in one of the lead, one of the most important songs, he takes off his shirt and suddenly he revealed fresh baked abs. And that's literally how the media kind of also discussed it. And the media was obsessed by it. And then 1 year later, there was this other movie by Amir Khan, Gajni, which is actually a remake of a Tamil movie, which in turn is actually a remake of an American movie called Memento. And in that movie, much more than Memento, the focus is on Amir Khan's phenomenal transformation. And you need to think of that transformation as not just one that he specifically did for this movie, but that he would kind of repeat with every new movie. So with that came kind of the idea that men needed to transform themselves, that part of the way to showcase how you're successful, how you're accomplished as a human being is this very notion of transformation. And the interesting thing, of course, with Amir is that he really does showcase a different body almost, like in every movie. But I kind of point at these two moments specifically as triggering a fitness boom in India. But the question I'm always asked here when it comes to the kind of, we're talking about masculinity and we're talking about man, is if this kind of muscular being, this lean muscular man, also equals toxic masculinity, if there's certain alignment between the way these men look and how we often think about masculinity in negative terms. And surprisingly, I found that didn't quite add up in my research. And a lot of that has to do also with transformation. So the moment you embark on a journey of transformation and you try to really change yourself, already you have to not just question your body, but also the things that you believe in. And I think that's what I've tried to capture in my book as well, that a lot of these men go well beyond thinking about their bodies, but about their lives in general. And partly that has to do with the group that I focus on are typically lower middle class men or new middle class men for whom this whole idea of being middle class is completely new. So their parents were labor class, working class folks who, and now their sons have become fitness trainers and they have gone through a process of upward mobility. And with that comes actually becoming middle class is also learning to be middle class. And one thing you already see here, like we're all speaking in English, right? But for these men, this is not something they would do at home. Rahul, perhaps you went to school, to an English medium school. So if you're used to doing that all your life in many ways. For these men, that's all very new. So that's already kind of a marker of difference when they try to move up the middle class ladder. So their bodies are part of that, but the moment they embark on that journey of becoming fitness and personal trainers, of participating in modeling and bodybuilding competitions, it's not just a lot of thought that goes into their bodies, but a lot of thought actually goes into where they belong in society, who they are. And in negotiations with their family, it often turns out that they have to question all sorts of elements of patriarchy as well, because under normal circumstances, they would have joined their father's businesses, their uncles, what their uncles are involved in. But in this case, they're doing something radically different. And one thing that I found quite illuminating about that, and also kind of make me hopeful, is that with that comes thinking about who you are as a man and what it means to be successful. A lot of these men take really big risks with their bodies, with their careers. They don't necessarily have a lot of money to fall back on. So a lot of that is already about stepping onto the stage of a new world, in a sense, of really doing something else. Why then? Okay, yeah, maybe we can come back to that in the follow-up questions as well, like how, where do I fit into this research as a man, as a researcher, as a gay man? How do I relate to my research? Maybe we can do that in the next round. What do you think?
Sure, that was fantastic, Michael. I'm really glad that you highlighted on the point of transformation, because that is actually a question. I mean, I think your observations are in a very interesting dialectic with that of Pradipta, and I'll just come to that in a bit. And maybe what I'll do now is I'll ask one question to Seema and Nandini, and they can respond, and then to you and Pradipta. That is to go back to the point that Nandini was raising about the position of animals in terms of hierarchy, in terms of ranking in the hierarchy. I was actually very, very intrigued when we were talking about that, because there are a lot of animal metaphors in the Kamasutra. And not just in terms of images and sexual positions, but in terms of moaning, in terms of making sounds while having sex. So I actually want to think about the figure of the animal in terms of desire. The question I would like to ask Seema is, how would you think of the presence, the figure, the image of the animal in relation to Kamasutra, and our popular expressions now of having wild sex? So what do those bearings have? And to Nandini, I would like to ask that, I mean, you touched upon it, but maybe I would ask you to elaborate it a little more about the turn to the animal in terms of writing fiction, as in, well, the animal is, of course, in terms of the hierarchy, even below the human. So what do you think, or how do you think bringing that, retrieving the position of the animal back into the conversation helps politically, literally, in terms of fiction and all of that? So that's one I would like to ask both of you. Any one of you can go first.
Okay, so thanks, Rahul. At some stage, if we have a chance, I'd really like to talk a little bit about the exercise point in the Kama Sutra to what Michael said, but talking about the animals. So the point, yes, you're right, the Kama addresses animals in a very big way. So there's a lot of mention, not only in terms of the positions, but also as people. So you're actually compared to certain animals when you are so your constitution is compared to that of an animal, and so on. Now, the Kama Sutra takes this particular thought of using animals from tantric philosophies, which say that each animal represents a certain shakti inside you. It represents a certain energy inside you. So, like in Hindu mythology, you have each god, and each god has their vehicle, their animal. That particular animal is not necessarily a physical animal that they're supposed to be on, but so if you're and you are the god who removes all obstacles, when you actually get to that point of bringing out that Ganesha, you have to mobilize the energy of the mouse that can actually gnaw through a mountain if necessary. So the animals represent the energy that you're supposed to raise inside you. And of course, as you know, the Kamasutra categorizes men and women through different animals. So you're either the elephant, the horse, the hare, the rabbit, etc. And it's all about the sort of qualities of that you bring to your life, I guess. Yeah, absolutely right. That it talks about during pleasure, during sex, there are certain types of sounds, and these sounds are actually supposed to be only made by the woman in this particular text. But I guess why should we restrict ourselves, right? And it says that you have to understand. This is about what Pradipta was saying about sensitivity, understanding, getting to know what is around you. You have to understand what level of pleasure as it goes up your partner is at, depending on the sounds that she's going to be making. So the very first one is the guttural sound of a pigeon. Then it goes up to the slightly more higher pitched sound of the cuckoo, and so on. And that tells you how to pace out your lovemaking, that if you're hearing the right sound. And so, but then I just see that even a sargam is, the sarigama is all based on the very same animal sounds, incidentally, that we talk about in the Kamasutra, the rising animal sounds. So yeah, I think that at every point, we refer back to the animals. And Nandini, I'm really delighted that you're actually looking at animals, because those are supposed to be the energy that we bring towards at any given point in time. And I think it's really important that people understand that. It's such an easy way to go into your own Shakti.
Thank you so much, Seema. That is a beautiful way in which you've gone into Kamasutra and brought out the importance of animals. I'd like to sort of take that as a cue and talk a little bit about how intrinsically connected the animal world and also flora, also the trees, the flora and the fauna around us, how intrinsic it was to the lives of people who lived in the past. And this is important because it's a lesson in survival. If we look at some of our oldest art, cave paintings by prehistoric men. I mean, if you look at the Bhimbetka caves, for instance, the subject is about hunts or being hunted. So it is humans in relation to animals, all right? And that is, 30,000 years old. And throughout our recorded history, and I'm talking here mostly about India, but again, it is true of most ancient cultures across the world. Throughout recorded history, almost all art has animal representations, right? So you have animals popping up in sculptures, in temple relief. You have animals popping up in objects of everyday use, like toys. You have animals popping up in jewelry, for instance. Even to this day, I'm wearing these karas. They have typically, I'm from Bengal, they typically have a gajamukha, elephant head, or they'll have a makar mukha or fish head. And in Tamil Nadu, where I now live, I live in Pondicherry, the makar earrings are very, very popular. To this day, these are designs that go back millennia. And 9 out of 10 times, they involve an animal. They sort of, it is an animal imprint that is being recreated. In furniture, if you look at 17th, 18th, even 19th century furniture, you will find that there will be animal motifs there. There will be elephant heads, there will be deer, there will be antelope, there will be lions popping up all over the place. If you look at miniature paintings, if you look at Mughal miniatures or Rajasthani miniatures or Pahari miniatures, there are so many examples, beautiful examples. In fact, on Twitter, I have started this trend of doing, tweeting about these pictures with the hashtag animals in history. And they pop up all the time, gazelles, cheetahs, horses, lions, elephants, dogs, so many examples. And there was the other day I had, there's a very good friend of mine. He's a very well-known fashion designer, Sonam Dobhal. He put up a picture of an old sari border, Banarasi sari border, and it had animals on it, running antelope. Beautiful. So what I'm trying to say is that in the past, our culture, our tradition respected the fact that we had to live in conformity and empathy with the animal world around us. We had to live, they had to live. If we had to live, they had to live. This relationship between man and animal was something that was embedded in our art. It was embedded in our life. It was embedded in articles of everyday use. It was embedded in our faith. One of the stories in The Blue Horse talks about these hero stone dogs. I don't know whether you've heard of hero stones. If you come from the south of India, they are very common. They are these stone tablets, and they commemorate local heroes. So if a village boy has fought off a bunch of bandits or has managed to save the standing crop and died in the process, he is this stone is raised in his memory. Guess what? There are several instances of hero stones dedicated to dogs in the south. So there are, my book, for instance, talks about 2 such hero stones in Karnataka and 1 in Tamil Nadu, very close to where I live in Pondicherry. It's in Viluppuram district. And these hero stones are kept outside the local temple. In fact, the priest actually has to pay some reverence to these hero stones, put a flower or 2, an incense stick or 2, and then go into the temple to worship to the deity. So you can imagine the level of reverence and respect that animals used to have. And today, when we are all stuck indoors because of this pandemic that we can make neither head nor tail of, it is coming back to us that maybe the modern way of living, in which we live against nature rather than with it, is not the right way. That it is important for our survival that we respect all species, big and small, not just ourselves.
Great, thanks for that insight, Nandini. I would actually want to come to Pradipta and Michiel now. I initially thought we would talk about the gaze and Michiel's position with regard to the book, but since we are running out of time, I would actually put some of what Michiel said in relation to Pradipta, the point about transformation. And the reason why I'm very hooked to this idea is because I think Pradipta's presentation and Michiel's observations are kind of in a dialectic. Pradipta is also relating to an idea of transformation, because if transness is about transformation, how does it speak to what Michiel is saying in terms of transformation? So Michiel's object of study is a male body which is aspiring transformation. And I guess we could talk about Shah Rukh Khan's abs a little more, but unfortunately we don't have the time. I'm thinking that how does the desire for a man to transform his body in relation to an actor or anyone that man desires or feels attracted to relate to the idea of transformation which Pradipta is talking about, that when you are out wearing a man's garment or a man's dress, people are laughing at you. How does that transformation relate to the kind of transformation Michiel is talking about? And Pradipta, I mean, particularly, I'm very intrigued for you to speak to it because you are in filmmaking and you are you have directed films. So, I mean, you'll shed some light about men's desire to become like Shah Rukh Khan and Amir Khan, as opposed to, the desire for non-masculine kind of transformation. So if any one of you can go first.
Okay, I'll go first. Thanks, Rahul. It's like I'll probably take the whole day. I can talk about. I mean, I can to be able to answer your question. I can talk all day.
No, you can't talk all day. Yeah.
Darling, I'm a teacher. That's what I do. I just talk. Okay, so transformation. See, yeah, it's brilliant. Like how Michiel is talking about a man's, transformation, I mean, physical transformation to become like a Shah Rukh Khan or an Amir Khan or Salman Khan. But my sort of transformation, the idea of transformation was a little different. Like for a lot of trans women, their their manifestations might be the physical transformation. I mean, going through SRSX reassignment surgery. But for me, that has never been the main thing, because ever since I was a little child, I always identified as a girl. So I'm one of the very fortunate ones, I would say. So for me, and of course, I mean, being born in a country and a society where an effeminate boy is not accepted, and you have a lot of stereotypes which a boy child needs to follow and be like, aspire to become like a Shah Rukh Khan, or during those days it would have been Mithun Chakravarti maybe. But then here I was aspiring to become like a Sri Devi or a Helen or Rekha. So it is about these sort of stereotypes, which later on, I think the mainstream film industry, they have made it into a commodity and selling it, because if that doesn't sell, the films would not sell. So overall, I think it is, of course, it's about every individual, this whole transformation process. So for me, transformation means inside. From inside, I've always been a woman, and transformation, I think, or aspirations have always, I mean, it started off probably from the popular Hindi cinema characters, stars like Helen, Rekha, Sridevi, blah, 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 all of that, to a woman. I mean, these are just a sort of portrayal in popular culture, but they might not be the real women, right? So, okay, I think looks like there's no time.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could just endlessly go on, but I'll have to come to Michiel for your take on this, and then maybe we can wrap up this. Michiel, you are muted.
I know. I just realized. I mean, it hastes a little bit. But I just saw Shivraj pop up and thought, okay, probably we're running out of time. And what Pradipta just said was already so beautiful, but of course relates to a very different kind of transformative journey. That said, one thing that I always try to emphasize is that when we see these men and they get, they are in many ways revered, admired, they receive a lot of attention, which is not just admiration, but also often there's a sexualized gaze that at play as well. So, but that we kind of think through that transformation as not just be one merely about the body, but often about much more than that, and that actual transformation stands in relation to how society itself is changing. So they are in direct relationship with that. And that's kind of what I try to do in Muscular India as well. In my book, I really try to understand how these men are transforming their bodies in relation to an India that is changing and transforming itself. And how do they pick up on certain cues, and where do they belong in relation to that narrative of a new India, which is actually quite a stale narrative in that it has existed for decades now. And I describe that as like the idea of the Indian middle class as growing rapidly. That is literally something that we've all been talking about for 30 years now. So, you know, in India, you're always surrounded by that story of changing India and a new India. And so I was, you know, part of the book was really about understanding how men, because the focus of my book is on men, how men relate to that and how do they pick up on that and engage with it. And when it comes to their own transformation, which is often a very long and deep process they've gone through, how does that speak to these bigger developments? And of course, partly what I try to do is also demystify the idea of knowing the male, who's often actually in recent years been characterized as deeply problematic and as toxic. And that is one thing that I haven't necessarily found. So my research doesn't underline that there's something wrong with the Indian male. At most, I think one thing that the conclusion in the book is that obviously this male is a very complex figure, like a female figure is very complex. And transformation is a way to kind of sort of pull that apart and understand that and come to terms with it. We're probably running out of time, so I'm going to give the mic back to you, Rahul.
Thank you very much. And I think you kind of said something very important, and that is the point about changing India and changing ideas of the nation in relation to masculinity and desirability, aspirations. I would like to thank all four speakers and would say that there are many things that we wish we could have just kept talking about, as Pradipta said, for the whole day. And maybe we will someday. And that is, I think, the thing with perspectives, that we cannot come to a conclusive moment. There cannot be a final observations, especially when we are dealing with sexy things like desire, pleasure, transformation, empathy, Shah Rukh Khan's abs, for instance, and animals. Animals, how can I forget that in relation to wildness, sex, desire? But also, with that note, thank you very much to all four of you for giving your time, for enriching us with your observations. And that's it. I hope we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Rahul. And clearly different lenses and perspectives. And I think we don't have to look very far. We go back to ancient history. We look at the transforming India, and there is potential for greater plurality. And we're hoping that we can continue exploring that theme throughout this festival. Thank you, everyone, for being on this wonderful panel.